You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Dr. O, Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Ivan Maisel on the show with me today. He has a phenomenal new memoir. It's called I Keep Trying to Catch His Eye, and this is an emotional roller coaster that will take you through this journey with Ivan, and we're going to talk all about it today. But this is a must-have in your book collection. I know you're going to love it. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Well, Hank, you're very kind, and I'm delighted to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. Before we get started, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
I grew up near you in Mobile, and I had the intense desire as a child to be the play-by-play guy for the Braves. But I grew up in a family of storytellers, and about the time I got to high school, I had an English teacher who really encouraged me that I could write and gave me the confidence to write, and it took off from there.
The being from the Southeast and having that dream of being the Braves play-by-play guy is pretty phenomenal. For when we're recording this, the World Series started last night, and the Braves are in the World Series and won Game 1. So that's, if being a kid from the Southeast, it doesn't really matter where in the Southeast you are, but the Braves are your home team.
They are, and I have lived in Connecticut for nearly 30 years now, but I am fond of the Red Sox, but the Braves still have my heart.
Right. There's just something about the home team, isn't there?
It sure is, especially when those roots are planted at an early age.
Absolutely. So that fondness early on of wanting to be a play-by-play guy, you maybe not that specific dream, but you were able to parlay that love into a career that is pretty much what you wanted to do, isn't it?
It's been exactly what I wanted to do. Now, I've been a sports writer. This is for 40 years. I did not get to college football until my sixth year in the business. And oddly enough, Hank, since we started down that road, I covered baseball my first 5 years in the business, and it pretty much cured me of my love of baseball. I didn't really like the people as much as I thought I would. And if you grow up in Alabama, you understand at a gut level the passions and emotions of college football.
Oh yeah.
And it was just natural for me when I had that opportunity to seize it and to be able to tell those stories and interpret those passions for readers is still a blast. I'm still having a great time doing it.
Well, being kind of in the Bible Belt where we grew up, college football might not be the official religion, but it's real close.
Yes, it's neck and neck with Baptist, believe you.
That's right.
And in all seriousness, growing up Jewish in the South, football was a way to connect to what everybody else was doing. There was always a sense of even in the 60s and 70s, a generation beyond my parents who were also born and raised in Mobile, there was still a sense of outsiderness. And I think that also contributed to the career I chose. I observed and I learned to observe from the outside quite naturally. And that's a lot of what I do. That's what I've always done as a journalist. So it all sort of flowed together. And now that I look back on it.
That's fantastic. Journalism is interesting to me. And I've known quite a lot of journalists who then turn to writing more long form. Sometimes it's fiction, sometimes it's nonfiction or memoir. But are there any particular tools that you have picked up along the way that in being a journalist that have helped you? When you're writing your memoir, I keep trying to catch his eye. Were there certain tools that you picked up along the way as a journalist that helped you in that pursuit?
That's an interesting question. I think trying to describe something like that is like trying to describe how you would write a song or make music. To me, I'm fascinated by lyrics. I would love to be able to write a good lyric, and I have just no capacity to do it. I think as you tell a story as a journalist, you develop a rhythm in your head as to how the story should flow. And to say that to somebody and then have them expect you to explain that rhythm is, I'm a little mystified by how it happens. I just know, how a story should be told. And I think some of that is having learned by doing it to trust my own voice and to trust my own opinion of what the story is. I spent, and I write about this in the book a little bit, I spent 25 years writing stories in which I tried to tell the reader everything that happened, figuring it with the intention of letting them decide what was most important, because I didn't feel qualified enough to do that. And finally, thank God, about 10 years ago, I just decided I had acquired the credibility and the gravitas in my own mind to do the selections myself. And once I did that, which is what you're supposed to do, I think, I became a much better writer.
So along the way, you got married, started a family. And did you say that you guys settled in Connecticut?
We did. My wife and I met in Manhattan when I was a fact checker at Sports Illustrated in the pre-Google era in the 80s. And I dragged her down. I began covering college football at the Dallas Morning News. And after Max, our second child, was born in 1994, Meg looked at me one day and said, "I want to go back east." She's from upstate New York. And I said, "Well, I don't." And she just pointed at me and said, "You're not here. You're traveling. I'm the one who's home. We should live where I want to be because I'm the one who's there." And I went, "Damn, she's right." And that was I didn't have an argument. I still, nearly 30 years later, don't have a good comeback for that. That would have kept me in the South. So we moved to Connecticut, and I got a job up there.
So when we open the book, I keep trying to catch his eye. You don't bury the lead at all. You drop us right into the thick of the story, and you start describing this evening when you're home, and you get this phone call, and you even talk about the type of soup that you're cooking. That it's interesting to me, these indelible memories that that we uh, that stand out in our mind. Can you kind of give us a brief overview of how the story begins?
Sure. I think with a topic this fraught with emotion, I felt like I had to set the stage and rivet the reader's attention the way that my own lapels were grabbed when that phone rang. Cold night in a really cold winter of 2015 in February. The phone rings. It's a Monday night, and it's a sheriff in Monroe County, New York, where Max, our middle child, 21-year-old junior at RIT, was going to school. And the sheriff said to me basically that he had found our car parked at the lakefront of Lake Ontario. And I knew right where he was describing. It's a mile east of my brother-in-law's summer home, where we had spent some time every summer throughout Max's childhood. And I knew what it meant. I knew it meant that Max was gone, that he had decided to end his life. He was being treated for depression, and it just didn't take me very long, Hank, to put two and two together. I mean, before I hung up, I knew. And
that, and then you walk us through contacting your wife, and then all of the events that start happening from there.
Yeah.
How do you one of the big themes of the book is dealing with grief, and how unprepared as a society we are for dealing with grief. What was your family going through at this time? That it's one of these things that we hope that we never know, but then when faced with it, how do you start compartmentalizing what's going on in life so that you can just live day to day?
Well, that's very well put. I was 55 years old and had spent a lifetime of avoiding grief and avoiding that sort of pain.
Sure.
My father had died 7 years earlier, and I really didn't deal with that very well. I refused to acknowledge he was dying until he had died. That was just easier for me, and a real disservice both to me and to him, and certainly to my children. But that's who I was. This time I didn't have a choice, and I had to learn how to carry the grief and continue on. And there were a few things that I learned to employ that helped me, and I describe them with the hope that they will help others, fully cognizant that, and I say so in the book, that all grief is individual and everybody does it differently. But this is what worked for me, and I'll try to be brief. The first was understanding that whatever you do, you have to do something to get it out of your system, because if you don't get it out when you want it to come out, it will come out when it wants to come out, and that's probably not going to be convenient to your life. There is a poet named Edward Hirsch who wrote a poem about his late son, who described, and in the poem, Hirsch describes grief as carrying a bag of cement up a hill that never ends. Mm-hmm. And that is a beautiful image, and it crystallized in my mind the idea that this was not something that you get through. Meg said, we don't deal in prepositions with this. You don't get through grief. You don't get over grief. It's just there. And you have to learn how to pick it up and trudge up the hill and continue to live your life. If you remain in the fetal position, as you surely want to do at that moment, you're going to miss a lot of other things, and some of them are going to be joyful. You just can't stay back where the person you lost is. It's just not possible. And those, and if just one more thing, the idea of grief is love. It's a very painful form of love, but once I realized that the amount of grief I had for Max was commensurate to the amount of love I had for him,
Right.
it just made it a lot easier to carry. I rather than stiff arm it, which was my first inclination, I began to lean into it and let it wash over me. And it just made it easier to carry.
Dabble is a proud sponsor of Author Stories. Dabble is an easy-to-use cloud-based writing tool that gives writers a way to organize, plot, and create amazing stories wherever they are. Write in our desktop app, on your Mac or Windows computer, tablet, or mobile device. Dabble syncs your latest version with the cloud on all your devices. Write anywhere and anytime inspiration strikes. We got you. Dabble is my preferred writing tool, and I think it will be yours as well. Visit dabblewriter.com for your free trial. You have an amazing story idea. You execute the writing and editing flawlessly, and now the only thing missing are readers. We can help you go from author to author superhero with Story Origin. Story Origin is a one-stop shop for marketing tools with a community of amazing authors working together to find reviewers, build mailing lists, increase sales, and collect feedback from beta readers. Everything an author needs, all in one place, from providing review copies or beta copies, reader magnets to ensure you stay connected with readers, easily distribute audio promo codes, universal retail links to send readers directly to the proper point of purchase, or provide direct download links for members of your mailing list. Story Origin has all the tools you need in one easy-to-use site. Use the promo code ASP21 at checkout when subscribing to the yearly plan, and you will get 10% off your first year. This code will expire December 31st, so hurry over and subscribe now. StoryOriginApp.com.
Well, Ivan, to add to the grief in the beginning, you guys didn't know for sure what had happened to Max. They found his car abandoned, and I think, as the days passed on, some assumptions probably started to creep in, but you just didn't know.
Yeah.
What was that period like when, in the period of not knowing, but maybe deep in your mind kind of knowing what the inevitabilities probably were, but just wrestling with the idea of hope, and what role does hope play in this, and where, just trying to figure out which emotions are valid emotions.
Meg had hope. I didn't have hope, Hank. I just looked at logically. There was only one answer, and the police who just were so professional in what they did and kind to us, explained that they would not make any assumptions about anything. They would just follow evidence. So they refused initially to say it was a suicide, and they said, well, maybe he went on walkabout. He just had it, and he went on a joyride.
Yeah.
Well, that's not who Max was. Max was shy. He was withdrawn. He didn't drink. And most of his close friends were online. He had friends on campus, but he had just as many friends online from playing video games. And so the walkabout thing didn't track. and Meg kept thinking there had to be another answer, but we were tracking his credit cards, and they weren't being used, and then the police began to go through what he had used his credit cards for, and developed enough circumstantial evidence that you could connect the dots to see he had intentions of ending his life. So that said, science and the temperature of the water in Lake Ontario did not surrender his body for 8 weeks. It was mid-April before some poor fisherman came across him, and thank God he did, because he could have very easily gone far enough out into the lake, or his body could have not surfaced anywhere near shore. It's a very big lake. So
yeah.
I knew, I just there was no other logical answer.
And you do a masterful job of describing the journey and all of the emotions that go with that, and how your family dealt with it in the book. And
Right.
We're going to have links to the book in the show notes of this episode where people can pick it up. But Ivan, I would like to ask you, as someone who lived this experience and finally got to the place where you could have some perspective on it and have the ability to look back on it and begin to process how you felt about everything and where you fit into this story. What was it that that motivated you to write this down, and what was it that that told you that this might be a story that other people could benefit from hearing?
I think I 5 years passed, and I had the perspective I needed to be able to tell the story. The writing, it was not therapeutic, it was not cathartic. I had to do all that work before I was in any condition to write. Once I did that, I was motivated somewhat by Max not being defined by how he died. We pretty much ignored the stigma of mental illness in how we reacted to his death publicly. We made everything public. We didn't hold anything back. And honestly, Hank, in those early days, you're trying to put one foot in front of the other. And now I was going to have to, try to remember who had top secret clearance to know everything, and who didn't, and who we were going to tell some things, and they're only a second cousin, we're only going to tell them this, and it was, I had no interest in that. And I thought that by not telling people what happened, that it would connote that we were ashamed of Max, and we weren't. He was sick. So there was also I think some motivation to bring sunlight to mental illness, and as I said earlier, I think to be, in terms of my grief, to be a docent through my grief, with that maybe people who like me went through life stiff-arming grief would learn how to carry it and how to deal with people who are grieving.
So how do you begin? This is one thing that I find fascinating about memoirs, specifically because unlike autobiography, where you're telling the life story and from cradle to grave, you're giving us a window into a portion of your life. And how do you determine what that window is? What's the beginning and the end of the story? How do you start tracking the trajectory? Obviously, you start us kind of at that first moment where you're brought into the tragedy. But then, carry us through kind of how you look at, what portion of the story you're going to share.
Well, the opening chapter, the opening scene was dramatic and riveting, and you got to know how to write a lead, right? You got to get them into the tent. And then I backed up and said, okay, this is who I am, and this is why I was. This is who I am and who I was at that moment when I was so ill-equipped to handle what was happening to me. And after that, it just kind of flowed. Honestly, oh, okay, I need to tell you about my, in order to explain who we were as a family, I had to tell you about me and Meg and my wife, and then this was Max's childhood, and then I came back to his death and the aftermath, and we had a very, I am a quasi public figure. I'm not, at the time I was at ESPN, I wasn't on TV very much. I mostly wrote for the website, but I was, those 4 magical letters meant that People magazine did a story about Max's disappearance, and, which we just, Max would have been just appalled at that. The fact that he was in People magazine, but, it just sort of flowed. And, once I got back to the moment when he disappeared, and then there was something chronological in the telling of it and the explaining the various stages of grief we went through up until, the present moment. So it really, and actually, a month before the manuscript was due, ESPN called me and informed me they weren't going to renew my contract, as of February 1st of this year. And I had been there for 6 3-year contracts, and that provided a sort of a way to close the book. This has happened to me, but it's not the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And right. This whole experience gave me a perspective to handle a lot of things that I would have had trouble handling.
So, Ivan, when you first start thinking about collecting these thoughts and writing a narrative, maybe it started as just an exercise for you, or maybe you had this intention all along that you were going to collect your memoirs to share. When do you start talking to Meg, your wife, and your daughters about telling this story? Because with your son, you're all a part of this story in a lot of ways. How do you start broaching that subject with the rest of the family and with loved ones who felt a very close connection to not only to Max, but to the greater story at large?
They they understand that that's how I communicate. But I said to them when I began to write, if you don't want me to do it, then tell me and I won't do it. And then when I finished the manuscript, I emailed it to the 3 of them and said, read this, both for tone and for accuracy, and to tell me whether you're okay with it, emotionally. And Sarah, our oldest, who's more of a writer than Elizabeth, had some great editorial suggestions, and we discussed a couple of things that pertained to her specifically, and adjusted them. And Meg, who is a terrific editor of mine, just because she knows me so well, we there were some, she was pissed. There were some things, that I just misinterpreted something that she had done or felt. And I said, okay, I'll fix it. And if I can't fix it the way you like it, I'll take it out. And if I take it out and you still don't like it, I'll send them their money back. There was no, I have to write this, compulsion. That's just what I do. And it was a way that to me just felt very natural, that it was time to be able to try to tell the story.
It definitely helps, it would seem like, to have a family that understood that about you, and understood, not only with your career that, for, a couple of decades, you've supported your family by writing and telling these stories. And so that would be a natural expression for you now to collect your thoughts in this way. As you went through the editorial process, where, I can only imagine that there were probably family meetings about, okay, this is getting real. It's going to be out, on such and such a date. Were there many conversations like that?
Not formally, meetings per se, but it was, was trying to keep them abreast of what was going on with the manuscript, with the book, to the point where I began to feel like, God, am I being tedious about this? Do I need to be talking about something else? Because it does sort of take over your life, the run up to a book, and now certainly during publication week, and the days and weeks after publication. I'm trying, and in fact, on the day of publication, on the eve of the day of publication, to be precise, I sat down with Elizabeth and said, how are you doing with this? Are you, what do we need to talk about? And she had dreamt about Max, and so she was telling me about the dream, and I had just dreamt about Max. So we were trading dreams, and Elizabeth is private enough that she doesn't, whatever misgivings she has, she doesn't tell me. She just, figures them out on her own. But, I think they know my door is open on that subject, and I try to tell them that, regularly.
The title of the book, I keep trying to catch his eye. Finding a title for a memoir has got to be excruciating. Has this always been the title? What was your process like for finding a title that would adequately express to a new reader kind of the tone of what they should expect?
Well, let me preface that by saying I suck at writing headlines. I was just never any good at it, and I marvel at people who can write a good headline. And that's really what a title is. I was staring at the wallpaper on my phone 3 years ago, and the photo is of our three children at Sarah's college graduation. Sarah is our oldest. And the girls are looking straight into the camera, and Max is looking up and away. Max hated to have his photograph taken. He loved taking photographs. He didn't like being in front of the camera. And I'm just looking at that photo, and he had been dead for 3 years at that point. And I thought, I'll never get him to look at me. And that, so that sentiment that I keep trying to catch his eye propelled me to write an essay that I posted on Medium in 2018 about where I was at that stage of my grief, and it really got enough of a response that that sort of began to plant the seed, though maybe I should do something in longer form, because Medium contacted me and had me do an audio file of the essay, which was not, I don't think it was 1,000 words. I don't even remember now. I think it was fewer than that. But I could tell that there was an audience for the way I was thinking about this and the way I was processing it and writing about it. And so that those seeds were beginning to germinate in my mind about maybe taking a book on. Look, I write in 1,200 word segments,
Sure.
chunks. I was not in a hurry to take on a book. My father used to say about me, Ivan's not scared of work. He can sit there and look at it all day long. So the notion of writing a book has always, I've written a couple, and it's just a lot of work. But
yeah,
this one kind of needed to be written.
So Ivan, when someone picks up I Keep Trying to Catch His Eye, and they sit down with the book, when they finish it and close that back cover, what do you hope they're left with?
A better sense of grief and of the grieving, and maybe a new outlook on how to handle both. And there's an old saying in Judaism that as long as someone says your name, there's a part of you that is still alive and still present on Earth. And maybe we can keep Max around a little longer.
Absolutely. I Keep Trying to Catch His Eye is available everywhere now. We're going to put links to it in the show notes of this episode, where you can grab it from Amazon, either in Kindle edition or hardcover, and audiobook. You mentioned that about doing the audio for that Medium post. Have you? How did the audiobook turn out of the memoir?
Well, I enjoyed doing it. I did it over 4 summer afternoons this year, and I think my Yankee wife is suggesting to everyone that they play it at 1.5x, but I don't think that's necessary. It was good, and honestly, Hank, and seriously, everybody else seemed to be concerned that I might be emotional reading the manuscript, but there was a bit of being performative in it. But the premise all along that I've said, along the fact that it wasn't therapeutic or cathartic, was I had to get to a place where my feet were under me before I could take this on. And once I decided to do it, it's reading it was, to me, I would rather have me read it with my tone of voice and my emphasis on whatever words that I thought needed to be emphasized than have an actor do it.
Right. I think that's perfect. I Keep Trying to Catch His Eye is available everywhere now. Ivan, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the stuff you're doing, is there a place where they can connect with you online?
Sure. I'm excuse me, I'm on Twitter at Ivan_Maisel, Maisel. I write for on3.com. It's a startup that I hooked up with dove in with, we turned the lights on August 1st. We cover college athletics. And, I would love to hear from people about the book. That would mean a lot to me.
Well, we will link up all of that in the show notes of this episode. Ivan, this has been so much fun chatting. I love the book. We're recommending it to everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Hank. That means a lot. I really enjoyed it.
Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
The brutes of the Andersonville Prison Hospital have moved me to the dead room, or so it has come to be known. None so domiciled have yet left this place. We receive only the smallest rations and only cursory care, to reduce our odors and spare the nostrils of our keepers. The good Christians of the Confederacy do not see any need to provide comfort to those who will soon sleep soundly enough underground. You must know, at least, how your father came to such an end. At Doctortown, Kilpatrick entrusted me with the conquest of a railroad trestle, and my bummers, my demolition team, acquitted themselves admirably thanks to my ingenuity with powder. We successfully destroyed the trestle work past Morgan's Lake. This would prove to be my entire contribution to the war. Federal troops were unable to capture the bridge or overcome the enemy's battery. Kilpatrick withdrew, and my bummers and I found ourselves on the wrong side of the Altamaha River, behind the enemy line with no hope of reaching our encampment. Rebels accosted us, taking our remaining supplies. We escaped and headed south, hoping by a long march to reach Seymour's forces in Jacksonville, but we encountered other rebel encampments at Jessup. 4 of my men were lost to gunfire. We marched west, then south again, barely evading capture. We had no choice but to brave the great swamp Okefenokee. Oh, on and on it goes, in every direction, endlessly. We trudged through miles of grasping mud and noxious rot, pursued by hunger and the mosquito, scratching at our arms and faces until all our skin was scourged. We lived off alligator meat at first, then nothing at all. My men grew mutinous, blamed me for all their misfortunes, threatened to throw me in a sack, weigh me down with stones, and sink my body. Yet was I not equally hungry? Did I not starve? I grew weary of their endless insubordination and contempt. Finally, they took hold of me and swore they would hang me by the neck for leading them to ruin. They were 5 in number, younger than I and more muscular. I was no match for them physically. They laid their hands on me, and I burned them. I burned those men. The flame rose from me as from a volcano, stripping the skin from those boys, blackening their faces, roasting their flesh. And let this be my final ghastly confession. I feasted that night, feasted on the meat of my prospective murderers. And that is how I survived. I staggered alone from that swamp, a mad thing, fueled by outrage and guilt. I saw an encampment of rebel soldiers and surrendered myself gladly. They say in Andersonville prison all men are brothers, equal in filth, equal in terror, equal in ruin. Yet I feel I may claim some small distinction, at least. For I am surely damned to a greater extent than any here.